So let's go to the text. So we're now in verse 2. And verse 2 comes in this outline, the method for generating wisdom. And this method for generating wisdom, there's three parts. First, there's the presentation of the two truths, which is what we're going to look at now and tomorrow. And then after that, there is that the need to realize emptiness, even if we're achieving liberation, and then an extensive presentation of the reasonings that prove emptiness. So those are coming in later years. So we're now looking at the two truths. So first we have an actual presentation of the two truths in verses 2, 3 and 4. And then we'll start to dispel some objections to the lower philosophical systems. But let's first have a look at the presentation of the two truths. So verse number 2. And number 2 says, the concealer, the conventional, and the ultimate are asserted to be the two truths. The ultimate is not an object of utilization of the mind. The mind is said to be a concealer. So here what is translated here as concealer or conventional truth. The word in Sanskrit is samvritti. And this word can be translated in a number of ways. The first way is translated, it can just means conventions. Another way is concealer. And the third way is interdependence. It can have these different meanings. And these two truths is really the core of this Madhyamika philosophical system. And what we saw was, briefly, is that for Vaibhashika Sautrantika, there is an independent objective world there. So how things appear and reality are same. Appears to be an independent world, that's how that exists. So for them, when they use this word, it really means just this, conventions. Whereas what we saw in the Chittamatra and Madhyamika philosophical system, they're both saying how things appear to us, that's not how they exist. Chittamatra is saying there seems to be an external world, there's no external world. Madhyamikas are saying there seems to be an independent world there, there's no independent world. So for both of them, how these conventions are appearing is not how they exist. So actually, when this word is used, this is the meaning. Concealer, meaning something is concealing reality. Reality is not appearing to us. So that's why these two truths normally or often are translated as conventional or ultimate truth. Sometimes instead of that you'll see relative. And so in that way of translating, then of course this conventional is really using that terminology or that etymology. Relative is a little bit this one. So interdependence, of course, is something that all of the schools would accept. But that's why when we see this presentation of the two truths here in Madhyamika, some people really don't like to translate it as conventional, but rather concealer. And we see that a little bit in the root verse, that we have one's in brackets and one, so it has both of those there. That has the concealer in brackets conventional. because the whole point here in Madhyamika, but also Chittamatra, is to realize that these things here that are appearing to us is not how they exist, that they're being concealed. So that's why concealer truth. Whereas in the Vaibhashika Sautrantika, we more see conventional truth, conventions. Conventional truth and ultimate truth. So in Vaibhashika, when they talk about two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth, then conventional truth is just all the objects that we see. Conventional truth, because that's conventions. Cups, laptops, everything. What is ultimate truth is what are all of these things made up of? If we break them down to the smallest point, what are the building blocks of this world? So then they say ultimate truth are what's called partless particles. Is ultimate truth. So that's a little bit like the idea now in classical physics that what is the building blocks of this universe is atoms and subatomic particles. So this is saying sort of somewhat similar, that is ultimate truth because that's what everything is really made up of. And then conventional truth are just all these objects that we name as cups and things and so forth. Sautrantika has a little bit of a different spin on it. And so for them, conventional truth is, again, just conventions. And ultimate truth are the actual things that these conventions are relating to. So for them, the cup, well, that object, is an ultimate truth because it functions. It's the real thing. That's what's real. The conventions, all the names we give to them, that's just conventions. That's just terminology. So that's how Sautrantika look at the two truths. What is ultimate, what is the real thing, is all the objects themselves, but the conventions, the names we give to them, is just conventional truth. But both of them are really talking about using this idea here. Whereas now when we come in both Chittamatra and Madhyamika, we have this idea of concealer. That something's concealing how things exist. So to talk a little bit about this, I'd like to go to His Holiness's commentary in the book, Practicing Wisdom. And so we'll go to page 17, and he says the following. So now we're talking about the Madhyamika. As I mentioned above, since there is this basic discrepancy between the way we perceive things and the way things really exist, there is an illusion-like quality to our perception of our own existence and of the world around us. In order to develop true insight into the ultimate nature of reality, it becomes important to understand the two truths, which refers to the twofold nature of reality. We find the term two truths also in non-Buddhist literature, such as the philosophical writings of many ancient Indian schools that also upheld notions of freedom, spiritual freedom. However, the doctrine of two truths referred to by Shantideva is that described in the writings of the Indian Madhyamika school, and in particular its sub-school known as Prasangika Madhyamika. So we're looking at that Prasangika interpretation of emptiness. And here it says that the two truths, a bit further down, are presented from the point of view of two different perspectives. From the perspective of our everyday experience, the reality of the world is conventional and relative. From the perspective of the way things ultimately exist, the reality of the world is emptiness. So here then the ultimate truth is emptiness, how things exist. The two truths are understood then as two different perspectives on one and the same world. And then he's talking about Chandrakirti, who's one of the great Indian masters that we study when we study emptiness. He says that Chandrakirti states that all things and events have two natures or two aspects. The conventional or relative aspect is known from our phenomenal experience, and the ultimate nature of things is perceived from the viewpoint of the ultimate perspective. So here too we find that the two truths are defined in terms of two different perspectives. One is from the perspective of our everyday experience, and the other is from the perspective of the true insight into the ultimate nature of reality. And then he goes in, a little bit later, he goes into like the etymology of the word conventional truth and ultimate truth. And that's where we see this idea of concealer. So let's go there because I think this can be very helpful. So this is on page 24. He says, let us now look at the etymology of the two truths. The term conventional truth implies a level of truth affirmed by the conventional subject or knower that rests on the mistaken belief in the true existence of things. Because of this, the Prasangika Madhyamika does not accept the truth in the context of conventional truth as referring to truth in the real sense. So here, of course, we're not saying what we perceive is true because actually the way it appears is not true. So that's why we call it a concealer. And so that's what's coming up now. He says, so truth here does not refer to some correspondence with the way things really are. Rather, it refers to truth within a certain limited relative framework. Truth in this conventional framework refers to a truth constructed by a particular viewpoint. And that viewpoint is our perception, or rather our misperception of the world, wherein we perceive all phenomena as if they possessed some kind of intrinsic reality. This deluded perception perceives people, things and events as inherently and truly existing. From this point of view, the things in our conventional experience are seen to be valid, reliable, truthful, enjoying some kind of intrinsic, discrete, independent, objective existence. The conventional truth is also referred to as the veiled truth or the concealed truth. And so this is the idea of concealer. So what he's saying here is that for Madhyamika, the things we perceive are considered to be true only from the perspective of our deluded mind. Our deluded mind believes this cup is existing independently. So for that delusion, that cup is true. But actually, in reality, we are concealed from seeing the reality of that cup because it appears to exist independently and it's not. So hence, we have the term concealer or concealed truth. And so he goes on, His Holiness, he says, this etymological explanation might appear to be providing some degree of validity to the perspective of our deluded states of mind. However, it is simply an etymological explanation. In actual fact, things that appear to be true from this deluded perspective need not even constitute a relative truth.
How come?
Sorry?
How come?
How come what?
They are not even they are not even relative truth?
Because we don't know them to be, because our mind of ignorance sees them as existing independently. So for that mind, that's why we have the term concealer. For that mind of ignorance, they're true. But they're not, actually. So that's why they're not actually truth. Because we don't see them to be dependent arisings or merely imputed. Now they appear to exist independently. So that's why the way in which we experience them now seems to be true, but it's not. That's why that's why it's called the concealer truth. It's only true for ignorance. Ignorance thinks that that's the way they are, but they're not. We're concealed from really seeing how they really exist. So that's why here in the two truths we often have, instead of, and we see that in the root verse, instead of conventional or relative truth, the term concealer truth. It's actually a falsity, because things do not exist as they appear. These things that we experience and perceive do not exist in the same way they appear. And His Holiness then a little bit later on that page 25, he's at the bottom, he says, without understanding the nature of these two truths, the conventional and the ultimate, it is difficult to fully appreciate the distinction between appearance and reality. That is, the discrepancy we experience between our perception and the way things really are. Without a deep understanding of this fact, we won't be in a position to get to the root of our fundamental ignorance. And so then, here, then, conventional truth is a truth for concealer. Concealer truth, concealer truth is what's often mentioned here. And of course, these are the things that we experience. But, of course, here, in the lower schools, they're true things because they exist as they appear according to them. But here, the things that we experience, it's not really a truth because they seem to exist independently. So these are only true for ignorance. So it's not actually the truth. So we need to understand this discrepancy in terms of the way in which things appear and the way in which things actually exist. That they do not exist as they appear.
Okay. In the Sautantrika, can you explain again what's the difference between the conventions and things?
The convention here is the names. Well, actually, also they talk about the sort of the mental image. Like, for example, they use this term generic image. So, like when we see this cup, then our conceptual mind has a concept, cup. And then we have like what's called generic image. An image, we relate to this cup through that image. So that's just a convention. Whereas that's ultimate truth, the actual cup, the cup itself. But the way in which we relate to that through this mental image, this what's called generic image, through the concept cup, that's just conventional truth, that's just convention. Whereas that is the thing that's actually functions, that's the real thing. The real thing is the cup. The image we use is a convention we use to relate to the real thing. So that's ultimate truth. The idea of cup we have in our mind, that's a conventional truth. And then His Holiness goes on to talk about the next part of the verse here we looked at. It said, the ultimate is not an object of utilization of the mind, and the mind is said to be a concealer. So again, that mind is the concealer, is this grasping mind, the mind of ignorance. And so what does it mean by it's not an object of utilization of the mind? So again, here we can go to His Holiness's text, and he talks about this on, it's on page 20. He says, among Tibetan commentators, there are two different interpretations of the line. This line here, the ultimate is not an object of utilization of the mind. He says, one is to adopt an understanding of the ultimate truth from two different perspectives and to maintain that the actual ultimate truth lies beyond the scope of intellect and cognition of an ordinary being. So that's not the one we're following here, though. And he says, another understanding of this crucial line comes from the writings of Tsongkhapa. in his view, the ultimate truth is not an object of the intellect that is dualistic, whose object of cognition is the relative and conventional. Instead, the ultimate truth is an object of a direct perception that is totally free of dualistic concepts and elaborations. Therefore, according to Tsongkhapa also, the two truths are defined on the basis of two different perspectives. So what he's saying here, the ultimate is not an object of utilization of the mind, means that here we're talking about the conceptual dualistic mind, the mind we have now. This conceptual dualistic mind can't perceive emptiness, because emptiness is the realization of non-duality. So therefore, we have these two minds. The mind that realizes ultimate truth is a mind that is free of conceptuality, is free of dualistic grasping. And so therefore, that's what's being said here. The ultimate is not an object of utilization of the mind, meaning that can't be realized by our conceptual dualistic mind, only through a non-conceptual, non-dualistic mind directly. Therefore, it says the mind is said to be a concealer, meaning that our current conceptual dualistic mind obscures us from seeing emptiness directly. And then also, just to add a little bit more, His Holiness talks about the sequence of understanding the two truths in terms of conventional and ultimate, the sequence. He says, and this is on page 21, he says, "As for the sequence in which the two truths are established, let us take the example of an everyday object such as a flower. First, the object, the flower, will appear to the mind, and then on the basis of that appearance, we are able to examine its real nature." Shantideva, Compendium of Deeds, this is another text from Shantideva, is replete with quotations from sutras where the Buddha talks in great detail about the causal principle that exists in nature, how certain causes and conditions lead to certain effects and situations. First, in these scriptures are extensive treatments of the conventional level of reality in terms of causality, so understanding causality. By examining how certain causes and conditions give rise to certain events, we can become more familiar with this world of multiplicity, the world of causality, which is, of course, the conventional relative world, which in turn has a direct effect on our experience. It is only on the basis of such solid grounding in understanding how things work in the phenomenal world of conventional reality that the analysis of the ultimate nature of reality can be brought into the picture. Once we have developed confidence in our understanding of the world of conventional truth, then we can enter productively into the examination of ultimate truth. We will then be able to fully recognize the discrepancy that exists between our perception of the world and the way things really are. To fully appreciate the extent of the discrepancy between our perceptions and reality, it is essential that we successfully challenge the idea of concrete reality that we ordinarily project onto things and events. This is our belief and experience that things and events exist in their own right and that they possess some kind of intrinsic identity and existence. It is through this process of negating this belief that we arrive at a deeper understanding of ultimate truth, of emptiness. So again, what he's saying is that first we establish conventional truth to establish causality on the basis of conventional truth. Then on that basis, then we can really start to investigate how do these things exist in this world of causality. How do they exist? Do they really exist there from their own side? Do they exist independent of us or not? And so then we can begin our investigation into the ultimate truth.
So simple, so clear.
Glen, could you just briefly mention why is this important?
Because we have to have a solid basis in conventional truth. Because if we don't really appreciate the objects that we see, if we don't understand them clearly, then how do we investigate how they exist? So we have to we have to understand the object first, and then we can investigate it. If we don't have a clear appreciation that this is a cup and it's created through causes and conditions and so forth, then we don't have really a valid basis on to investigate the ultimate truth. Because we could, at a conventional level, come up with really strange ideas, and then that would be very difficult on that basis to then investigate the ultimate truth. So we're not talking about any sort of profound understanding. We're talking very simple here. Very simply understanding the world of causality, that's all.
It's not the subject matter which is difficult, it's the time.
And can you make a further link how does this relate to the human condition?
To the human condition.
Why do suffering of...
Because we are ignorant, and one of the ways which we're ignorant, again, at the very simple level, we have many distorted views. The sort of first level is we see things which are changing as unchanging. No? We not only grasp onto this cup as independent, but it's quite stable, really. You know, it's the same cup as we had yesterday, same cup tomorrow. So already causality will help us to break that down. Intellectually, of course, we all know things are changing moment by moment. But is that how we see things? No. So if we investigate causality in terms of impermanence at a conventional level and come to see that actually there's just flow here, that'd be very helpful. Because in fact that, if we really appreciated that, just that, we're so close to emptiness, because what we are appreciating in terms of causality is that it's not that, it's this. So if we can really at a conventional level see that this is just flow, experientially, we're very close to emptiness, very close. So that conventional, that sort of investigation we can do a little bit more easily, because that's not something that is obscured, because we know that. So therefore that, I think, would be very helpful. Also then going back to what you mentioned about the human condition, so if we have that, the next distorted view we have is we tend to see pleasure as happiness. You know, those pleasurable things, that's really making me happy. But if we've come to some insight into impermanence, then what's there to grab? There's nothing there to grab, it's just flow. So that conventional, or that investigation into impermanence, we make it experiential, of course, if we just leave it as intellectual, nothing. But if we really experientially, already then, pleasure as happiness, I mean, we'll experientially see that it's completely transient. It's never going to satisfy us. So already then, in terms of the three levels of dukkha, the second one, that's crumbling. Pleasure's happiness. So that's going to help with that, into that insight into dukkha, is that experience. And so similarly, then, if we really then can see at a deeper level that it's our mental afflictions that are driving the whole show here, that why we're stuck in this all-pervasive dukkha, if we can understand that it's not anything out there, it's within our own mind. It's not what's happening to us, it's how we react to what happens to us that's causing the suffering. Then, through that insight, that's into the second noble truth, then we can develop the aspiration to be free through those insights. Then we can turn to it's not here anymore, but we can turn to in the lowest philosophical systems, we can turn into the Vipassana practice of no self. Then where is the self in all of that? And that's where even this conventional impermanence is very helpful. Because if we just look at our body, just look at it, become familiar, what do we see? I mean, really? What's there? Flow, change, constant. If we look at our mind conventionally, what's there? Flow, change, constant. Where is there a self in that flow and change of body and mind? Can't be. Because the self is something stable, static. So how can you have a stable, static thing in two things where it's just flow? So that conventional, just looking at the body and the mind, that was going to be very helpful for coming to realize no self. Very helpful. And similarly, the emptiness. Same thing. So we just look, we understand, then again, it's very close, very close. It will really help set up our investigation into emptiness.
Would it be correct to say that actually realizing emptiness is being able to see simultaneously the ultimate and the conventional truth after we worked on really seeing the so when combined and when you look at it at the same moment, you see both. This is the real emptiness?
Okay, that's a good question. So the question is, I think, about the order in terms of conventional truth, ultimate truth. So again, if we really establish the basis of conventional truth, we have a good platform to come to realize emptiness. But now, of course, these conventional truths are concealed. So then when we go into the realize emptiness, then as a result of realizing emptiness, when we come out of meditation, then these conventional truths are no longer concealed. So we will realize this only after we realize this. So it's a little bit like lucid dreaming. In a dream, the reality of the dream world is concealed to us. Because the real dream world seems to be a material external dream world there, no? But if we become lucid, we realize the reality of the dream, then that dream world is no longer concealed. I mean, it still appears to exist independent of us, but we know how that dream world is. We know that there's no material independent world there in the dream. So it's no longer concealed to us. We realize the reality of that dream world only after we become lucid. So similarly in the waking world, now this conventional world is how it really exists is concealed to us. And then we meditate on emptiness. We come out of that. We realize emptiness. We come out of it. We're lucid now. So there still appears to be that world there. But now because we're lucid with emptiness, we'll realize that's not how they exist. So we'll realize that this world is a dependent world, not an independent world. So that's the order in which the realization comes. We realize this first, and then we actually realize this after.
But still you don't see the both. You see one.
Yeah, and then going on to that is that, and if we get time tomorrow, there's another chart we're going to look at. This is really the difference between Nirvana and enlightenment. Even someone who's achieved Nirvana, eliminated all ignorance, mental fiction, suffering, even to them, the world appears to be existing there. But because they've realized emptiness, they never buy into that. It's never concealed for them, so it never causes a problem. But still, it appears as if it does exist there. And so, why is that appearance like that? Why do things appear like that when they're not really like that? It's because our mind is contaminated, or what's called stained by ignorance. That's very hard to get rid of. So that only comes after Nirvana. We keep meditating on emptiness, and with the sort of backing of Bodhisattva, we can wipe out those stains. Which means that when we've wiped out all those stains, then we can see emptiness and the phenomenal world at the same time.
Only when we're enlightened.
Only when we're enlightened, not before. Before, We have to alternate.
Fully united.
Yeah, fully enlightened. Yeah.
As of seeing is not enough.
No.
So simple.
שוואי, חבר'ה.
קלט.
פעם.
That's all I wanted to cover this afternoon, but we've still got 5 minutes left. Is there any more last questions before we wrap up there today?
Yeah, I have a question, your recommendation, like the best practice or best meditation, because there are few on emptiness, or what would you recommend so we can realize?
Oof. Okay, what's the best practice for emptiness? Well, of course, as we briefly saw earlier, in all Buddhist traditions, there's ethics, concentration, wisdom. So, of course, if you're not being ethical, then, well, we're not going to even probably be interested in this if we're not being ethical. We'll be doing other things. But then the next basis is the concentration practice, shamatha practice. So if we don't put some effort into that, then I think the wisdom practice of emptiness is, we can put a lot of effort into any of the practice and not really get anywhere. It would be like a scientist who's trying to run an experiment with faulty equipment. I mean, they can run it 100 times and get 100 results, and none of them are going to be conclusive. Our equipment is faulty now because our mind is distracted, dull, not focused and clear. So we need to make our equipment more functional. And then we can run the experiment again and again and again and again. That doesn't mean that we only do shamatha practice and just forget about wisdom, emptiness practice altogether. Because what you're going to find is that if you're just doing shamatha practice, you're going to have obstacles and mental afflictions sort of tend to get in the way. And you need some way to deal with them. And so these other practices, including the wisdom practice, can help with that. So yes, we need to emphasize shamatha to get a more stable, clear mind. But while we're doing that, then bring in a bit of heavy artillery, a bit of vipassana, a bit of compassion to subdue the mental afflictions a bit. And then your shamatha will go deeper, which means then your emptiness practice will go deeper. And so they'll sort of feed each other. They'll work together. So we need to have like an integrated approach. And then in terms of vipassana practice, emptiness practice, then again, we just mentioned here, one way to approach that well is actually impermanence. Impermanence. And particularly start with the body, because we're all sort of up in the... Yeah, so Goenka is a sort of entry-level wisdom vipassana practice. So that's basically going into the body for impermanence. So that can be a good place to start, and then we can move on from there. And in terms of the emptiness practice, then sort of the classical approach that we see, particularly in Chandrakirti, Shantideva and so forth, is to start me, the person. And a little bit like the meditation we did in this session. Where is the me that seems to be here? That's a sort of a classic approach. That's one way. Another way you find in other schools in Tibetan Buddhism, in the Kagyu and Nyingma, is more mind. Look at the mind, nature of mind practice. So to investigate the mind or the awareness that is here. Where is this mind or awareness that seems to be here? So that is that's quite a sort of a different approach than the person. So what can be useful is to, of course, get teachings on both of those and see what the practices are, how to do them. Do a little bit of practice and then see which of those approaches sort of resonates with you, and then you can go into that. Because once we realize emptiness with respect to one thing, we realize it with respect to all. So, you know, if we can realize emptiness with respect to me, the person, then that translates into mind, body, cups, everything. Similarly with the mind. So then it would be helpful to work like that. And particularly like in the shamatha practice, of course, concentration practice, if we are using the mind as the object or resting in awareness, then probably makes more sense to go into the nature of mind emptiness practice, because that's the same object that we're using. But if we're using the breath, then of course we can use either, would be okay, the person or that. So again, I would recommend just to become familiar with these approaches and then sort of use the approach that seems to be more effective for you. Okay, any last question? Otherwise, I think we've run out of time there. Okay, so let's stop there for today. So tomorrow we'll continue on in this discussion. We'll start to have a look at the views of the other philosophical systems. First, the sort of Vaibhashika Sautrantika, and start to sort of refute those views. And then later we'll be going into looking at how to refuting the Chittamatra view tomorrow. So again, tomorrow will be from 10 till 5, so same schedule. So until then, enjoy your evening. See you tomorrow morning.